A very busy weekend for the San Francisco Giants. There was some forced action with the deadline on Sunday. Qualifying offer decisions had to be made, and option decisions had to be made as well. And the Giants had several club options, and they did place a qualifying offer onto one of their players. So we'll talk about all of that. We'll talk about the results of the Gold Glove Award. Buster Posey and Brandon Crawford, Mike Yastrzemski and Brandon Crawford were finalists. So we'll talk about what happened there. And then the Giants made some waiver claims as well. So a lot to get into on today's Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants Baseball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, which now includes YouTube, so check us out there. Anyway, as I said, coming up on today's show, there is a lot to get into. Sunday was a day of forced action. It was the deadline. It was 5 days after the World Series ended. Teams and players across the league had to make final calls on options. Some player options, some club options, some mutual options. And then teams had to decide where or who to give qualifying offers to. The qualifying offer, a 1-year, $18.4 million offer. It's the average of the top 125 top paid players in the league, and that number this year came out to 18.4 million. So the Giants did put that qualifying offer onto one of their eligible players. We'll get into that in a minute. Anyway, just a lot to get into, but I want to talk about the options first. The Giants had club options over Johnny Cueto, Wilmer Flores, José Álvarez, and Buster Posey. And it's a little bit complicated with Posey because, of course, he's retiring. So we don't know if the Giants are going to be obligated to pay the buyout and or if they're going to choose to just pay the buyout, $3 million buyout on that $22 million club option. But the other option the Giants had was on Johnny Cueto. And so this was a formality. The performance just ultimately has not been there for Johnny Cueto over the last several years, and he's also dealt with a lot of injuries. But the Giants elected to pay Cueto $5 million to leave, essentially. It was a $22 million option, but the $5 million buyout effectively makes it a $17 million decision, and of course it was a no-brainer to decline. But the significance is that Johnny Cueto, who was here for 6 seasons, he missed a lot of time, so he wasn't necessarily full seasons for Cueto, but he is now officially a free agent. And so, he rides off not into the sunset. He has said he wants to continue playing. I would be very surprised if he plays for the San Francisco Giants again. I know a lot of people have suggested they would be fine with having Johnny Cueto come back on a much cheaper deal, maybe a 1-year deal for a low amount, but I just don't see that happening. I think the performance just hasn't been good enough to warrant that, and there's not really any significant upside left. I could be wrong. It is Johnny Cueto, but I just think the chances of that are slim to none. So it's probably the last we've seen of Johnny Cueto in a Giants uniform. The other decisions the Giants had to make, there was a $3.5 million club option for Wilmer Flores, and this one had a $250,000 buyout. And so, again, essentially a $3.25 million decision. And the Giants did elect to exercise their club option for Wilmer Flores. So this ultimately is going to be a 3-year contract that he's going to play out. It was a 2-year deal plus the club option, but when it's all said and done, Wilmer Flores is getting 3 years, I think $9.5 million from the Giants out of this deal. So far it's turned out to be a pretty solid deal. I mean, to want to keep him around for that 3rd year just speaks to how he has been good and productive when in the Giants lineup, and he's been a nice kind of mix and match piece for the Giants, a real threat against left-handed pitching, but more than capable of playing more than that if need be when there are injuries inevitably. And so, yeah, I mean, he's hit 30 home runs across 200 or 600 something odd plate appearances in a Giants uniform over the last couple of years. So a real power threat, and his time with the Giants has just been really solid, and he's going to be back in 2021. So welcome back to Wilmer Flores for $3.5 million. It'll be the last year of that contract, and then he will reach free agency after the 2022 season. So the last decision here that we knew about, there was actually one surprise decision that we'll talk about in a second, but it was for José Álvarez, left-handed reliever, obviously. And Álvarez in his first season with the Giants had a 2.37 ERA spanning 64 2/3 innings. He was just rock solid after a rocky start. And it was, for me, a no-brainer to pick up this $1.5 million club option that had a $100,000 buyout. So a $1.4 million decision, no-brainer after the season he had. He's one of the more underrated relievers in the game. I talked about this when the Giants signed him, but he's pitched every year since 2013, and the worst ERA he's had after his rookie season in 2013 was 3.88. That's the worst season he's had since 2014. Just really consistent, and was good again for the Giants in 2021. So he will be back, and he will continue to probably be an underrated, not really exciting, not dominant, but just gets the job done, and was, like I said, rock solid for the Giants. So apparently there was a club option for Jay Jackson, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but I really want to get into the qualifying offer thing next. This is a big deal, and we'll talk about who got the qualifying offer, who didn't, why it matters, and what it means. And then lastly, we are going to talk about Brandon Crawford and Mike Yastrzemski being Gold Glove finalists, and we'll see if either of them was able to win. Before we get into it, does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. In my case, I'm the neighbor. People have my login. And yeah, it's definitely true that we've got devices doing different things all over the house. I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part is that there's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directv.com. That's directv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. All right, as promised, we are going to talk about the qualifying offer decisions. The entire league has to go around making these calls on their eligible free agents, and it's always a really interesting time when we look at who gets the qualifying offer and who doesn't. For the Giants, we talked about their realistic candidates as Brandon Belt, Anthony DeSclafani, and Alex Wood. We talked about how DeSclafani and Wood were not very likely, but possibilities. I kind of compared them to Drew Smyly last year, where the performance was good, but it just seemed like too much of an overpay ultimately to put the qualifying offer on them. The risk of course, if you can call it a risk, and it is that the player accepts the qualifying offer and you just think it's too much of an overpay. The upside is that if the player rejects the qualifying offer, you get draft pick compensation if they sign with another team. Also, the upside is that they could accept it, and you're fine with that, and even happy with it. That's kind of what happened with Kevin Gausman last year. Giants put the qualifying offer on him. He accepted, came out, and just had a great season on a 1-year deal. So it's hard to be too much of a negative when it's just a 1-year deal. 1-year deals are, historically team friendly because there's not a lot of risk associated with them. Thanks again, though, for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. So the Giants ultimately did put a qualifying offer on Brandon Belt. And to me, it was pretty much a no-brainer. He has been one of the best hitters in baseball over the last couple of seasons. If we combine 2020 and 2021 and look at players who had at least 500 plate appearances. So that's not too high of a bar, or it's not too low of a bar, with just the 60 game season in 2020. So it's a significant amount of plate appearances. Obviously, a lot of players had more if they were healthy the whole time, and Belt has not been, and that's a fair point to make. But when we look at, minimum 500 plate appearances, the top 3 hitters in the game have been Mike Trout, number 1, Bryce Harper, number 2, and Brandon Belt, number 3. And this is according to Weighted Runs Created Plus, which is an all-encompassing offensive metric, weighted properly, makes adjustments for park effects, and 100 is league average. So Mike Trout, 171, 71 percentage points above league average. Harper at 164, Belt at 163, Acuna Jr. at 157, and Tatis Jr. at 154. So it's pretty remarkable that Brandon Belt has been that good when he's been on the field the last couple of seasons. And I think it is fair to look at, beginning in 2020, especially with this Giants team, because that's when Gabe Kapler and his new coaching staff came in, and we've seen so many players, both on the offense and the pitching side, have better performance since this coaching staff came in. And so Brandon Belt, we've seen it from Posey when he played in 2021. We've seen it from Crawford. He's been really good the last couple of years, and Brandon Belt is no exception. The one kind of caveat is that he has been injured a few times, and so the playing time is just not quite there. But again, like I said, with 1-year deals, as the qualifying offer is, it is very low risk. So you might say, oh, Brandon Belt, he's always hurt. There's a ton of risk. There's really not. It's $18.4 million. If he were to accept, and this is the key point, Brandon Belt and every other player around the league who got the qualifying offer now has 10 days to accept or reject the offer. Free agency also has officially begun, and Brandon Belt and anybody else who's a free agent can currently negotiate with other teams. And so let's say Brandon Belt talks to other teams out there and he gets, a 3-year, $40 million offer or something. And he says, you know what, that $18.4 million offer by the Giants isn't good enough. And then he says to the Giants, look, I've got this other offer that's better. What can you do? And they say, nothing. We're just going $18.4 million for 1 year. He can just accept that other team's offer, thus rejecting the Giants' qualifying offer. And if that were to happen, the Giants would get draft pick compensation for that loss because they put the qualifying offer on him in the first place. So again, it forces action, and one way or the other, within 10 days, we'll know if Belt accepted or rejected the offer. And he could get a better offer from the Giants. Like, they could try to sign him to a multi-year deal. This doesn't preclude that from happening at all. It's just kind of a formality, and it's generally like a no-brainer to me. But there was some thought, again, that Anthony DeSclafani and or Alex Wood could potentially be candidates to get the qualifying offer. I didn't particularly find that to be likely. And something we're going to talk about all week is multiple sources, platforms have put out their free agency predictions as of today, which is always a lot of fun. MLB Trade Rumors, ESPN, and Fangraphs are three that I've been looking at all day today already. And they basically just look at all the free agents out there and predict their contracts. And some of these sources also predict what team the player will ultimately land with. But we can look at we will look at Kevin Gausman, although that's not really a conversation for today. But we can look at Brandon Belt, we can look at Anthony DeSclafani, we can look at Alex Wood and see what those predicted contracts are. And then it kind of can inform us as to whether or not the qualifying offer made sense. So when we look at Anthony DeSclafani, who was kind of like the big name who did not get it for the Giants, even though to me it really wasn't surprising, the predicted contracts for DeSclafani, MLB Trade Rumors has 3 years, $42 million, which is an average of $14 million per year. That's the highest prediction. ESPN has 3 years, $36 million, not that different, $12 million per year. Fangraphs has 2 years, $20 million, just obviously $10 million per year. So between 10 and 14 million per year, and between 2 and 3 years. And that's why 1 year, 18.4 million, you can kind of see why that would be considered an overpay. And for Alex Wood, generally the prediction is for about 10 million per year over 2 or 3 years. And again, you can see why 18.4 million for 1 year would be considered an overpay. Like as an example, ESPN has Wood ultimately getting 2 years, 22 million. That's almost the same as the 1 year deal, but over 2 years. So it's obviously, it's not a surprise that neither of these guys got the qualifying offer, even though the Giants have so many spots to fill in their rotation. They have tons of confidence in themselves to be able to ultimately do that. And it doesn't mean that these guys won't be back. It just means they didn't get the qualifying offer. So ultimately, no surprises. Coming up next, we'll talk about the Gold Glove Award a little bit. Yes, a Giants player did win a Gold Glove Award. So we'll get into who it was, why it matters, and what it means next. And we'll also talk about that mysterious club option that nobody knew existed for the Giants that they did, in fact, exercise. But before we get into it, I want you to know that I love Thanksgiving. All of the good food and treats, and plenty of them, but maybe you want a yummy dessert that isn't full of calories and sugar. That is like the story of my life. I love, pie and cake and all this good stuff, but I don't like to eat sugar, so I never end up eating dessert. But that's where Built Bar comes in, because they taste like candy bars, but they are very low in sugar. So, skip the raspberry pie and get a raspberry Built Bar instead. It's my personal favorite, covered in 100% real chocolate, and it's a great choice when you're hungry and Thanksgiving is right around the corner. There's nothing like a Built Bar Black Friday either. Mark your calendar, Black Friday will be a huge event with lots of surprises. Go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your next order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, as promised, we're going to talk about the Gold Glove Award being announced. I actually kind of spaced on the fact that was even going to be announced already. A lot of these awards drag on a little bit, but the Giants have a lot of awards candidates. They had Crawford as a finalist for the Gold Glove, along with Yastrzemski, and they've also got Crawford and Posey as Silver Slugger Award finalists. Gabe Kapler is going to be a finalist. I don't know that they've announced the finalist yet, but for Manager of the Year. And there's probably some other Executive of the Year, Farhan Zaidi, probably going to be a candidate. So when you win 107 games and pretty much nobody saw it coming, that's what's going to happen. So anyway, without teasing this out too much longer, Brandon Crawford won his 4th Gold Glove Award, and it was well deserved. There's some talk that that he didn't deserve it, and Francisco Lindor or Kevin Newman should have had it. To me, defensive metrics are not perfect, and so it's hard to say Lindor had more defensive runs saved. I don't know. We did a whole show on this. I think it was on my bonus content channel, by the way, which you should check out. On YouTube, under my personal name, I have a separate account where I just do bonus content, basically continuing this conversation just beyond the regular shows. But I think it was there we did a whole little segment on the candidacy of Crawford and Yastrzemski for the Gold Glove, and we looked at outs above average, which is, StatCast reliant. We looked at defensive runs saved, which I think is done by Sports Info Solutions out in the state of Pennsylvania, and there wasn't consensus, right? Like in one of them, one of the players was much higher than the others. In another, it was a different player who was much higher than the other. So it's hard to say definitively who the best defender was, but all I know is if you watched Brandon Crawford all season long, it's hard to be much better than he was. And he just was spectacular defensively this season. And it's really remarkable because he seemed to be in defensive decline in the last, not necessarily last year, but in the years before 2020. He seemed to be getting worse defensively and at the plate. And, like Buster Posey, like maybe Brandon Belt, it seemed like they were just playing out the last few years of the contract, and that this was the offseason in which we were finally going to be free of those contracts and Farhan Zaidi could start over. But everybody became an extension candidate. It's kind of amazing. Brandon Crawford got an extension, 2 years, $32 million beginning in 2022. And Buster Posey was certainly an extension candidate before he decided that he was done and decided to retire. And Brandon Belt, they just gave the qualifying offer to, and there's clearly interest in bringing him back. And I would be surprised if he ends up elsewhere, frankly. So, it's just amazing that all of these guys revitalized their careers, and it's a huge credit to the coaching staff. And I'm just going to continue to call out that Donnie Ecker leaving from his role with the Giants to be the bench coach and offensive coordinator with the Texas Rangers is a big blow. He wasn't the only hitting coach. They did have 3 hitting coaches. Justin Veely and Dustin Lind remain. I don't know what the Giants' plans are to try to replace Ecker if they do want to replace him. I don't know if they feel like that's an absolute necessity or something they need to figure out if it's a necessity. I have no idea, and I haven't heard them comment on that. But anyway, I mean, Ecker and Veely and Lind deserve so much of the credit for the turnarounds by Crawford, by Belt, and by Posey. But defensively, someone I don't mention enough is Kai Correa. And I apologize because, defensively, we look at the improvements of Brandon Crawford, and Kai Correa is in charge of the team's defense. And so I give him all the credit, not all the credit, I give Crawford most of the credit, but Kai Correa, new coach, known as a defensive drills guru, and the Giants' defense was really, really good in 2021, including guys we expected to be bad, like Wilmer Flores, Donovan Solano. They were very solid in 2021, and I give Kai Correa a lot of the credit. Also, Ron Wotus, who is retiring himself, which is another big loss to the Giants family. So anyway, just a huge congratulations to Brandon Crawford. Well-deserved. Mike Yastrzemski did not win the award, but it is an honor just to be nominated and recognized that he was, in fact, one of the best defenders in the game in right field in 2021. So lastly, I just have to mention that the Giants announced, in addition to everything I just talked about today with Belt and Flores and Álvarez and Cueto, they also announced that they exercised a club option over Jay Jackson, which nobody knew existed. So it wasn't just me who kind of slept on this. We didn't know because Jackson signed with the Giants a minor league contract last offseason, but apparently there was a club option in there somehow for 2022. So we don't know what the terms are. I would imagine it's a very cheap option, maybe in the $1 million range, but the Giants picked it up. So Jay Jackson will be back for 2022. Of course, they could always they could go another direction and cut him loose, but we don't know what the terms are. As soon as we know them, we'll report them to you. They also announced that they added Yunior Marte to the Major League roster. Marte is a right-handed pitcher who spent much of the season in AAA, and had really good numbers there. I was a bit confused as to the timing of this. He was Rule 5 eligible, so adding him to the 40-man protects him from the Rule 5 draft, but that deadline to protect players is not for another 10 days or so, so it was a little odd that yesterday was the day they chose to announce that. But that's what they did, so we'll provide an explanation if we get one. Anyway, though, that is all the time we have for today. I know a lot of you ask questions for the mailbag on Twitter that I put out the prompt for, and it's usually Mailbag Monday, but we're going to have to do Mailbag Tuesday tomorrow, so that's what we'll be doing then. And then throughout the rest of the week, we're going to be looking at these contract predictions. We'll look at predictions for Giants players like Kevin Gausman. There's a huge range from these reputable sources in terms of what they think Gausman will get. I'll talk about which one I think he'll get, or whereabouts I think he'll land, and then other Giants free agents, and then players who might ultimately sign with the Giants. So there's going to be a ton to get into, and that's going to be the theme of this week. So thanks again for listening. My name is Ben Kaspick once again, and thanks for making it your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Aram Layton is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. That show is free and available on all platforms. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Also liking, commenting, subscribing on YouTube, all of that good stuff. So thank you in advance, and thank you so much to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Stay locked on Giants.